Larry Bernard joining me tonight, and we've got our topic for tonight, Freddy vs. Jason, 15-year retrospective. We've got quite a show. We've got, let's see, I've got some pretty cool chat browser overlays here. All right, so Collider has 6 insane Freddy vs. Jason ideas that never actually happened. It took New Line Cinema's 16 years, about $7 million, and dozens upon dozens of drafts by even more scriptwriters to finally decide how to pit slasher icons Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees against each other on screen. The 2003 final result, Freddy vs. Jason, directed by Ronnie Yu from a screenplay by Damian Shannon and Mark Swift, is a perfectly fine horror mashup. Freddy tells some one-liners, Jason kills some teens, and no one even wins in the end of a film that is, unfortunately, most memorable for Kelly Rowland, of all people, calling Freddy Krueger a slur that immediately guaranteed this film would age into 2018 terribly afterward. Both Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th franchises were rebooted. Robert Englund never played Krueger again, and Freddy vs. Jason just sort of exists in limbo as a final monument to a time when Hollywood still created memorable monsters. But what could have been? Oh, what could have been? So, in the frenzy to be
Jason is apparently Blumhouse is going to be bringing Jason back, though, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah,
I don't know about that, but
yeah.
Well,
there's somebody who's got the money together and trying to get a Jason movie out.
But New Line now has the rights back.
Yeah, and
because it was. Who was it, Brad Fuller, the other day, that said that the reason they never got one off the ground is because they didn't want to do one if they couldn't do the sequel, and they knew they wouldn't have the time to do the sequel in the period allotted, so they just decided to scrap the whole idea.
Can we just nuke these intellectual property rights issues that are making it impossible to make movies anymore? Can we just blow them all up?
Yeah, pretty much. But here's some of the things that Collider says. Ideas that were brought up and dropped. The first one they have is Jason on Trial, a draft from writing duo Brannon Braga and Ronald D. Moore, who are also credited as the minds behind the story for Mission Impossible 2, put noted supernatural...
Before you get into this, though,
yeah,
I think it needs to be noted that I think everybody in Hollywood did a pitch for Freddy versus Jason.
Yeah.
Like there's like nobody I've talked to or haven't heard that. Oh yeah, I did a pitch for that, including Jason Goes to Hell director and Jason Lives director. Pretty much anybody who's directed any Nightmare on Elm Street or Freddy movie before. New Line had a script from Peter Jackson for a Nightmare on Elm Street movie they never used. But yes, go ahead. No, I just wanted to say
that sounds like that would be brilliant. Actually, Peter Jackson.
It actually sounded really like a good idea. The title was dumb. It was called The Dream Lover. It was supposed to pick up right after part 5, and I believe Alice and all that stuff was in it. But basically it almost would have set up Freddy versus Jason perfectly, because the movie starts out in a similar way where Freddy has lost all his powers. Like the kids on Elm Street aren't scared of him anymore. They actually go to sleep and dope themselves to go to sleep just so they can go in and beat the shit out of Freddy. So, yeah. So he finally gets to the point where he gets all pissed off, and I guess there's one kid that is very, like Alice, to where has powers and stuff within the dream realm. And it's just a whole convoluted thing. And like I said, it would have been a perfect setup for Freddy versus Jason, but they never used it. Don't know why. But yeah, that was kind of the crutch of the story, was that kids weren't afraid of him anymore, so they go in there and they'd have fun ganging up on him in the dream world, I guess. So,
that one didn't make it into the Collider, but yeah, Moore and Braga's idea would have had Jason Voorhees on trial for his crimes, and I guess the screenplay was written during the height of the O.J. Simpson trial, which, but the next idea was the Cult of Freddy, and that one was that idea was by Freddy. The first introduced draft was titled Nightmare 13, Freddy Meets Jason by Louis Abernathy, and then expanded on by David Shaw, who wrote The Crow. And basically the idea, I guess, they had was like this cult of violent wayward teens who worship Freddy Krueger and a young punk that...
Fredheads.
Yeah. So, they burn their skin, they take
this storyline actually carried over sorry, as I say, this storyline actually carried over through quite a few of the scripts. Like there was, I think, even up until the one that they filmed had the Fred heads in it. Like that was a major pushing point for like every one of the scripts. Like they even, like another thing that kept going through all of them, and it might be in this one too, was they take Jason's heart and put it into one of the kids, and that was in, or one of the kids' heart and put it into Jason, and that was in several of the scripts too. I think this is the one that started it all, though. Go ahead, sorry.
That's really creepy.
Yeah, and Abernathy's script also had an idea for a boxing match with Ted Bundy as the ring announcer, and Ted Bundy then gets shot by Lee Harvey Oswald. And then, of course, there's a time travel thing written by Peter Briggs where Freddy and Jason get basically erased from time. And then a final idea was Pinhead from Hellraiser shows up at the end and says, "Gentlemen, what seems to be the problem?" But yeah, that's basically...
That was actually the original ending up until the one we actually got.
Yeah.
As far as I know, that ending was even in the script that we got filmed, but they couldn't get the rights to Pinhead, yeah.
Oh, that's a shame. That could have been cool.
Yeah, they also had the...
yeah, they're supposed to be in a... I was going to say, the lights come up and Freddy and Jason are in a ring, and then, of course, then Pinhead steps out of the dark and, "Gentlemen, what seems to be the problem?" Or something like that, I guess was the line.
Yeah, because... but, here's the thing, though. I actually had seen this YouTube video. I forget who posted it, but it was called The Nightmare Ends on Halloween, where Freddy tries to recruit Michael Myers. And, of course, Michael Myers is just sitting there catatonic staring at a jack-o'-lantern until Freddy goes ahead and slashes a jack-o'-lantern and disturbs him. And then, it kind of devolves into this thing where, Pinhead shows up and, it turns out Freddy's actually in hell and he's about to be tortured by Pinhead. I mean, that would actually be pretty interesting to see a mashup between Freddy versus Pinhead, just because Pinhead's job is to punish people who are evil. And Freddy, of course, is about as evil as he can
get. This sounds like a cinematic movie universe of like 80s and 90s slasher movie monster universe. This sounds like this could be an interesting movie universe.
Yeah.
Well, maybe someday Blumhouse or somebody like that can gather them all up. New Line almost did, and that's kind of where this started. So, back on track. Sorry, Mike.
Yeah, but one of the things I liked about this film, though, is that the screenwriters really took their time and got it right, because they pulled the best elements from both franchises. I was always more of a fan of the Nightmare on Elm Street series. I had seen a couple Friday the 13th entries pre-New Line when it was still with Paramount, but wasn't really a big fan. But it seems like they pulled the best elements, because most of the characters within Freddy vs. Jason, they're pulled more from Nightmare on Elm Street, where you actually sympathize with them. And that's one of the things that I think is important to any good horror movie. You have to sympathize with the characters, because if not, you're just rooting for them to get killed. And that to me is what ultimately ruined a lot of the slasher films of the 80s and 90s. Because they were so shallow and one-dimensional, you just couldn't wait for them to die.
Well, yeah, that was kind of the point, was you're supposed to root for them to die.
Yeah.
But it wasn't intentionally, though. Because with Wes Craven, if you remember the original Nightmare on Elm Street, I mean, you weren't supposed to root for them to die at that point, because these were just ordinary kids, and he kind of came from like the John Carpenter school of writing, where you want a sympathetic character, because then when you do horrible things to that character, then people will chime in and say, "Oh God, I hope this person lives."
Right. Well, and Wes Craven understood that. He understood that you needed a Laurie Strode. You needed somebody that the audience can gravitate towards and root for, and at the same time, like you said, Friday the 13th had this problem, especially for most of the movies, where 90% of the teens are completely forgettable. To the point where they're all just cookie cutter stereotypes. It wasn't until you get to like the fourth film where you finally started to get a lot more characterization in the characters. Because I could tell you a couple characters from the first three movies, But until we get to the fourth film, that's where I can actually tell you character motivations, as far as like Tommy Jarvis and the other older guy who shows up to find his sister, who was one of the characters who disappeared in one of the earlier films. They finally started to get to the point where, like, okay, we got to have a little bit of story here other than Jason. Because, and it should be pointed out that Freddy versus Jason does kind of take place in Freddy's world, not Jason's world so much.
Yeah,
I mean,
well, it does go to Camp Crystal Lake towards the second.
In a
half
way,
of the
yes,
film.
but I feel like what just to kind of get around to what you're getting to is, the teens are treated like they're in a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. The story itself is treated like it's in a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. It's kind of like how King Kong basically was the guest star in King Kong versus Godzilla, because it was made in Japan, so it was like they licensed the character. So it's kind of like Jason was the guest star here. And as far as I know, it's generally in the Nightmare on Elm Street series as far as the continuity, because it doesn't really share any continuity. Jason, I mean, you could kind of say Jason's in the ground, so it could pick up after Jason Goes to Hell, but it's still kind of ambiguous on that part.
Yeah, because
this kid.
Yeah, I think once New Line had acquired the rights to Jason, that's pretty much when they brought that into the Nightmare on Elm Street continuity, and they could actually share that universe. But it was still many years, because at the end of Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday, they have Freddy Krueger's arm coming up and grabbing Jason's mask, so you knew they were planning it for years, and it just took so long because they had to go through so many drafts. But I think the reason it took so long is because no one wanted to be the one to make a bad crossover film. It's like they weren't prepared, and I actually kind of respect the screenwriters for this. No one was prepared to settle for anything less than 100% on this, and they actually came up with a really plausible way for getting these two together, because in the opening montage, Freddy kind of explains how kind of refreshes the backstory, but then explains how he can't come back because people have forgotten about him. So he basically recruits Jason by resurrecting him and impersonating his mother, and sends him to Springwood to kind of like remind people that Freddy exists and that he's coming for you. Which I thought was actually pretty good. They could have gone with the whole Kodo Freddy thing, but I think that probably wouldn't have gone over as well. But this one actually, I think, respected audience intelligence, and it seemed to me to be a bit more plausible, because if Freddy's in hell, well, he wants to get out and kill again. Well, he can't do it if people don't remember him. So that actually kind of set up the rules in a way that made sense.
Oh yeah, and there's direct references to tons of the other films. The home where the kids come out of, the Dream Hospital, that's the same hospital that's in part 3. Yeah. So there's all kinds of little connections to the other Nightmare on Elm Street movies. It's sad we didn't get any other Friday the 13th characters in there, because there is a version of, in Adam Marcus's version of Freddy vs. Jason, which he was the one who directed Jason Goes to Hell, and it was his idea to have Freddy's hand come up at the end of the movie and pull down the mask, even though obviously the whole motivation for New Line getting the rights to Jason was so they could put him in a movie together. But circumstances, like you said, they kept getting in the way, and they couldn't get the right script. But his idea had all the characters picking up from, all the other movies and working together too. And then there's several characters in other drafts, like Alice and Tommy, I think, made it into other drafts, which would be Tommy Jarvis from Friday the 13th and Alice, I can't think of her last name, from the last few Nightmare on Elm Street movies. But
there's the Dream Warrior. No, Dream Warriors is part 3.
Dream Warrior, or last part 3.
The Dream Master and the Dream Child.
The Dream Master and the Dream Child, yeah. And even in certain drafts, like her kid is all grown up now and stuff like that, Jacob, and he played a major part in it. So I mean, there was so many drafts of this movie, or in different versions, that it's just insane. Like I said, it's more like who didn't do a draft in Hollywood, pretty much.
Yeah, and although I have to say that there was at least one or two Friday the 13th type characters in Freddy vs. Jason. For example, Catherine Isabel's boyfriend in the movie, the character's name is Trey. He's actually one of those guys you actually are rooting early on for him to get killed, and he goes pretty spectacularly, because he gets macheted while he's in bed, and then Jason folds up the bed and crushes his body. So and that's obviously what gets people talking again.
Right. I think Freddy only gets one kill in this movie, doesn't he?
I think he gets one or two proper kills. Yeah.
Because he gets the one kid from the dream clinic, and that's it that I can recall. Or because Jason kills the rest.
Yeah, basically, yeah, because the premise is that he set Jason loose to kind of remind people that Freddy's alive again, so that he can enter back into the world. But then he doesn't realize, oh wait, I can't control this guy, and that's where the conflict comes from. But so
which is very clever.
Yeah, and another thing that I really liked was the the whole concept of, okay, so people have been killed, so how do they mourn? They throw a rave party in a cornfield. And that is just, such a 2000s way to...
Jason that I was going to say, one thing I don't like about Freddy versus Jason is it's at that tail end of the Scream era, to where every one of the teens is almost a Scream-esque type character, because that really took over after 96 for up until, I guess, the Saw years. It was like every movie was a ripoff of Scream as far as the teenagers are, because they were all smart, quippy, sexy, hip and with it, and they weren't as naive as they all were in the other movies. And that's kind of the way I felt about these teens, outside of the main girl, who was kind of more or less Alice kind of, or not Alice, but Nancy kind of clone almost.
Yeah.
They want everybody to be a little genre savvy in these sort of movies nowadays. And that started a little bit with Scream.
Yeah. Not a little bit, but a lot of it. But yeah.
Yeah. And
almost every movie for the next 10 years was a carbon copy of Scream. Yeah. Urban Legend, I Know What You Did With That Summer, all that stuff. Yeah.
Although I do have to give them credit, though, that they had one of the most outrageously hilarious scenes during that cornfield raid, because Jason shows up after he's killed Gibb and kind of denied Freddy his first kill within the film. And then he comes upon a couple of kids at the rave, and their response is, blow beer on him and try and set him on fire. Oh yeah, that worked out well. Not. It's like that flaming machete right through the chest as the kid runs away. He's like, oh my god, dude. That was just outrageous.
It was one of the best parts of the movie. I do remember the audience. I seen it on, it was one of the first times I seen a midnight premiere. Because back when that came out, that wasn't the norm. To where they had movies open the day before, like they do now. So I remember going to see it at midnight, and it was just, the crowd went nuts at that part. They loved it when Jason went just on a rampage.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I'm just sad they weren't able to get Kane Hodder for that movie, but the guy they did get actually did a pretty good job with it. Although one of the things
Ken Kurtzington, I think it is.
Yeah, and although one thing I almost lost my lunch actually was like Jason's losing to Freddy in the dream world, and then Kelly Rowland is the one who gets volunteered to give him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and she's trying to like peel back the mask and like obviously about to vomit herself, but then he wakes up and starts but
see, like, that's the thing that was funny, is because all that stuff with the kids and Jason where they knock him out and all that stuff, a lot of that feels like it's coming from the scripts, because I've read a few of them back in the day where I said one of the big through lines was one of their buddies gets killed by Freddy in the beginning, and they end up putting the heart of their friend into Jason to resurrect him. So there's this one part where they're driving in a van and they go through a drive-through for some reason, and Jason's in the passenger seat, and they can control him because he's their friend. That's the whole thing. Like, that was the whole gimmick of that. And it's like a lot of that van stuff and all the whole traveling stuff, all that seems to come from that. Like, the kids having, hanging out with Jason. It was like just this weird idea of, like they treat him like a dog almost, to where it's like he can do their bidding because it's their friend's heart in him. It was just weird. But yeah, all that stuff kind of comes out of that part of that script.
Yeah, and
it's weird how vestigial bits of old scripts stay in the movies.
Right.
Like,
well, yeah, because the whole thing was they were trying to get him back to Crystal Lake or whatever it was, so he could fight on his ground or something like that. Similar to this. That's what I say. Yeah, because this script that we have now, it seems like it pick and chose what little bits it wanted to from other scripts, and then just kind of did its own thing in some ways.
Yeah, and it's Deputy Stubbs actually. One thing I was actually thought was kind of a cheat in the film, although I will acknowledge it was a necessary cheat, is that people seem to figure out what's going on just a little bit too quickly. But I also kind of understand the corner that the writers were in, because it was either have them figure things out too quickly or have them have the audience go through a rehash.
Have them be extra stupid.
Right, because having the audience sit through a rehash of what's been going on while the characters try and find out what the audience knows anyway. So it was a bit of a cheat, but it was a necessary one, I think. But this is a film that, to me, just had very few flaws in it as far as storytelling goes, and there was actually a lot that. The one thing I
didn't like was making Jason afraid of water. That was the only thing I didn't like, because it made no sense.
Yeah, because he's
never
been
afraid of water before.
Right.
And,
right, and I think maybe Freddy kind of played
it kind of makes sense. If you think about how he died when he was mortal.
There is that point, yeah. And if in the dream world, I can understand that to a point. But then you got that scene when What's-Her-Face sits up and she goes, Freddy died by fire, Jason died by water. How can we use that? Right. I just want to smack her across the face.
Right, but that
actually, sounds so stupid.
Yeah, that actually, I think, has its origins in Jason Takes Manhattan. Because if you remember the end of that film,
can we forget Jason?
Which he walked. Well, I was just going to say, which is kind of counterdictive, because he walks to Manhattan underwater.
Right, but on the other hand, they do use water to defeat him for Jason Takes Manhattan, so they're kind of borrowing.
And I think there's even cut footage of him walking underwater too somewhere. I think I've seen.
Yeah, well, Friday the 13th was never all that consistent, so I mean, it's one of those cheats where it's like.
Well, even Adam Marcus was told to forget Part 9, like he was supposed to act like Part 9 didn't exist, and that's why. Yeah, the movie starts the way it is. It's like I just can't just have him be here.
Is Part 9 the one where he gets Jason in outer space?
No, I'm sorry. I'm Part 8. He was supposed to ignore, not Part 9. Ugh. Jason Goes to Hell would be Part 9. Jason X is in space. Sorry. So yes, when I was referring to 9, I meant 8. My bad. I'll just say Manhattan from now on, because that's the one I'm talking about.
I mean, can we forget Jason Goes to Space, because that was really terrible.
Yeah, why not? I know some people dig it, but
yeah.
Well, did you know what's funny? Speaking of Kane Hodder, he actually plays Freddy in Jason Goes to Hell. He's the hand.
So
he's actually played both Freddy and Jason in that movie. Yep, and that's why the hand's way too big for the claw. If you notice. But yeah, it's the actual claw from I believe it would be the Freddy's Dead claw, because it'd be whatever one they had last. But yeah.
So, but I have to admit though, because they actually kind of made Jason a bit of a more sympathetic character in this film than they had in previous Friday the 13th entries, because
and that really comes out of the scripts I was talking about. Because where they have his friend partner.
Yeah, because Freddy initially fools Jason into reviving by impersonating his mother, and then taking advantage of because once Jason is pulled into the dream world with Freddy, because then he's fighting Freddy on his home turf, and that's where Freddy has the advantage, and the whole reason why they take Jason to Camp Crystal Lake for the third act is because I hope taking him there will give Jason home advantage for some reason, if they can wake him up, and because
not only that, if because Final Girl, that he's home.
Because Final Girl Lori has that they gave her Heather Langenkamp's dream ability to pull things out of her dreams, so that their idea, I guess,
actually that's something that originated in the original movie.
Yeah.
That's how Nancy pulled the hat out, and so that's always been a common thing in almost every movie. Especially in the first and last one.
And not a lot of people realize this, but that was never actually meant to be taken literally, because the whole point of Freddy killing people in their dreams is that he actually messes with their head to such a degree that you don't know what's real and what's a dream, so that.
Well, that's funny you say that,
it's always kind of ambiguous as to how much of the story is a nightmare and how much of it is actually taking place. Because I
was going to say, because I think
Yeah, Wes Craven really blurred the lines in that film, and that's actually part of the why that film was so scary, because uh, you're basically taken off balance for the whole duration. I mean, because once they kill off,
Well, I think Wes actually admitted that the whole first movie is a dream.
Yeah.
I think he said at one point because at the end of the movie, when she gets in and all her friends are alive, that's the beginning again. Like, she's dreamt all this stuff that's going to happen. So even though it does eventually happen anyway, it's like, it's supposed to be like the whole thing was a dream the whole time. That was kind of the whole setup. But I think people rejected that idea, so it never caught on. But
the other reason that movie was so scary is, for those who didn't grow up in the 80s, there were always urban legends about towns killing a child molester or a serial killer. You know, that
well, and there's a lot left out of that movie. The scene where Ronnie Blakely shows Heather Langenkamp the claw. There's a deleted part of that where she says, "You, Glenn, Tina, you weren't always only children." So that even adds even more depth to it. It's like, oh, holy shit. So all these people had kids before this that got killed by Freddy.
Yeah.
So Heather Langenkamp's character had an older sibling. Same thing with Johnny Depp's, and so on and so forth. So it like adds a whole nother layer, and I don't know why they didn't leave that in there.
Yeah.
Because it adds even more motivation to the whole thing. It's like, you know, and that's why I didn't like the remake, because they took that aspect out of it to where it was like, they did the right thing. The cops showed up. They busted him, but they didn't sign the search warrant in the right place, so they had to let him go. Technicality. You know what I mean? And it was like that little thing set all these parents off. And I could see that kind of thing happening, and especially in the day and age of today. You know, if some child molester were to get off, you know, lightly on some technicality, of course you're going to have, you know, mob justice in the situation. And that's where I think the remake also screwed up between that. And then they spent an hour of the movie trying to set up that Freddy might be innocent to go nowhere. Yeah, it was like, okay, if you're going to go for it, because then that makes sense of why Freddy's getting his revenge, because he was innocent. He was set up. But then when they turn it around and like, oh no, he was guilty the whole time. They just wasted an hour of your time. Well, you know what I mean?
No,
it was like,
I mean,
yeah.
the older movie morality sensibility was, you know, yeah, he was a horrible, monstrous person, but it's also wrong that he was brutally tortured and killed by being set on fire.
Right, and that's
a dream monster thing.
And it's kind of the same thing. And like I said, at least if they would have gone that route in the remake, like that was the original motivation, it was like, okay, at least you would have been trying something different, a little bit different angle. But the way it is now is just a muddled fucking mess. You know what I mean? It's like none of it makes sense, and it's just to get to moments that are like the first movie, so you can go, oh yeah, I remember that in the first movie. You know, it's like, yeah.
AT-ATs, it's a thing I know.
Exactly, same kind of thing. I don't know if you guys have seen the remake of Nightmare on Elm Street, but it's atrocious.
Fortunately, I've managed to avoid it. I've just gotten. I mean, I'm sure Jackie Earle Haley does his best to do
that's
Freddy,
the sad part. Because like when they announced it, I'm like, Jackie Earle Haley, I can see that he could pull this off, especially after Warshack. I'm like, this is the right guy. And what do? They give him the world's worst script. They rewrote the movie I don't know how many times. There's like so many different versions of the movie and deleted scenes and this whole other thing where Freddy had like a, I don't know, almost like a demon-esque cult kind of robe thing in one part, and just some weird shit that's like, where did you guys get? Why is it so hard to sit down and do something that was so simple? That's why Nightmare on Elm Street works. It's a very simple story, very simple rules. You fall asleep, you get killed by Freddy in your dreams, you die. Simple as that. You know, it's like, you don't have to get more, you know, as long as you follow the rules they set up. And that's what happened with part 2, was they got to the point where the audience was like, what the fuck is this? This is not even what we signed up for. And New Line knew at that point they fucked up. So from part 3 on, there is a Bible that you have to go by with Freddy, to where it's like, these are things Freddy can do. These are things Freddy can't do. You know what I mean? And it was, part 2 was a direct result of that. He's like, you cannot have Freddy out with a bunch of kids at a pool that are 5 feet taller than him. You can't, you know, this whole like bouncing into bodies and shit can't happen no more like this. You know, if it's a dream, fine, but you can't have it in the real.
Right.
You know,
Well, the original concept of Titan Part 2 was that he was trying to break into the real world, and through this guy who had moved into the
right,
old
and it's a unique idea.
Right, and actually, I kind of like that scene where he's in the dream, and Freddy pulls his scalp off and exposes his brain and saying, "You've got the body, I've got the brains," and
Well, yeah, that's one of the most iconic scenes in Freddy history. But that's the thing with part 2 is like the first hour is good, and then the last half hour just falls apart.
Yeah.
it's like you get the idea, you're on board with the concept, you know what Freddy's up to, it totally kind of still works, but then things just kind of go off the rails. So they're just like, okay, we cannot have this happen ever again.
Yeah, and then of course the ending of part 2 is ripped off from the ending of part 1, which is I think another mistake, because it's like they're trying to do the same movie, except Heather Langenkamp wasn't available, so I don't know. But
I don't blame the writers. I don't blame the director. I don't blame New Line. They were just trying to, to a point, cash in on the name. But they also, you got to give them credit for not rehashing the first movie all over again, which was the most common thing in that time.
Still is.
Yeah. To where when we get to part 3, it's such a welcome, refreshing movie, because not only is it not like the first two, but it's still back in the continuity of the first one and retains all the same rules and gives Freddy a larger backstory, brings back Heather Langenkamp, gives her a better, a beefier story there too, and makes these kids real people. And that's the difference. I don't think it was before we started the show, but we were talking about how, Friday the 13th teens, most of them are pretty fucking generic.
It's because it's a slasher movie, and the thing about a slasher movie is you're wanting to get gratification of all those people that you can't, throw a pickaxe into in real life, that there's a movie monster who's throwing a pickaxe into them.
But all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, I could probably tell you each and every kid character in all those movies, who they are, what their, character traits are, all that kind of stuff. And they're not...
Because they weren't the bad guys. Freddy was the bad guy.
Right. And one of the things I liked about the Nightmare on Elm Street series is that, these were sympathetic characters that because, like I said, if you sympathize with a character, you invest emotionally in it. That way, when you do horrible things to that character, the audience is going to react exactly the way you want it to. And, that's why, Wes Craven and John Carpenter do so well with their horror films, because you actually invest time and energy into these characters. And today's movie, I don't want to bring up this stuff into a horror discussion, but, since The Last Jedi was technically a horror film, it just wasn't intended to be. But,
horrible and horror are two different things.
Okay, I'll concede that. But it's like they've got like these cookie cutter concepts that you just can't invest in. I can't invest in Ray. I can't invest in Mikey Spock or even the rebooted Alex Murphy from RoboCop. You're right.
Last Jedi really ruined a lot of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't.
The problem is that the meme on the internet of soy about being feminized. No, we need to use the meme soy more appropriately. Bland, tasteless, gooey, without any substance to it. Takes on the flavor and spice of things, but it doesn't really add anything to it. That's what these characters all are. They're just unadulterated filler.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Although, getting back to Freddy vs. Jason, though, another scene I really liked was the Stoner Freeberg, because he's just like some casualty from the rave massacre who gets dragged along during the second half. But one of my favorite scenes is Freddy turns into a hookah smoking caterpillar and possesses him, and and Freeberg of course dies like a spectacular bitch, which
he is one of my favorite characters, and like I said, I can't believe they just didn't get Jason Mewes to play the part.
They should have. They really should have, because
that would have been a great Jay and Silent Bob crossover.
Oh my God, Kevin Smith would have had a field day with that if he. But I think they would have had to have him.
They're my favorite part of Scream 3.
Oh Lord.
Hey, it's Connie fucking John.
Oh God. But yeah, it's like, but one of the things about Freddy vs. Jason that a lot of people may not remember is like the length to which the parents went to protect their children, where they actually started taking people who dreamed about Freddy and kind of like quarantine them and dope them up on dream suppressing drugs to really kind of protect them from
Right.
the rest of the community, and that to me, I was always kind of surprised that never got more discussion, because that was a pretty extreme tactic to do, because the kids who get quarantined, I mean, they basically spend the rest of their lives, even though they're probably perfectly sane, but they're treated like they're insane, and then, I mean, but it kind of shows that the extremes to which people will go to protect their kids, to where they'll actually harm them.
A director who was willing to do something interesting could have had some fun with that.
Yeah,
They
because
probably did have more to it, but I'm sure they just didn't have the time.
Yeah, because there have been movies and episodes of the revived Twilight Zone when Forrest Whitaker was hosting. There was an episode with Amber Tamblyn where they're in a community, and they kill kids who are disruptive and incorrigible. And then of course there's what was that movie with James Marsden from also had what's his name, who played John Connor in Terminator 3. I'm trying to remember, but it was one of
I
these
know who you're talking about, and I can't think of his name now.
Yeah, it's one of these forgettable movies where they brainwash all the kids who act up, and then they go nuts.
Well, that's a carryover from. Well, I was just gonna say that's a carryover from the original Nightmare on Elm Street series, and that's that the kids are paying for the sins of their fathers.
But like, if you were throwing together a Nightmare on Elm Street movie and the kids were on drugs, you could make that such a good allegory about ADD.
Well, that's kind of what that one movie I
autism.
was talking about, The Dream Lover.
Yeah.
That was what the whole thing was. The kids would get all fucked up and doped up so they could pass out, and then they'd go into fuck with Freddy. But yeah, that's the whole thing, is that that whole overarching idea is the basis for it, is that the kids are paying for their sins of their parents, and in the end the parents are trying to stifle them so that their sins aren't found out about, and they're still they're bearing the brunt end of this whole thing. And I kind of like how they leave it open, because it's like, okay, so this place is still going. You'd have thought after all the events of part 3 that it got shut down. Oh no, it looks like it's twice as active now than it was then.
Yeah.
Because like you're saying, they're shoving every kid who even mentions or utters Freddy in there, doping them up with this Hypnosil, which worked in part 3, but it didn't work well enough. And we see now that they've kept experimenting with it and all this kind of stuff throughout the years. And it would have been interesting to kind of get into that a little bit more, but I think they left it open for a reason, because it's like that evil is going to continue to go on with or without Freddy.
I mean,
that's kind of the whole point, is that the parents are going to continue to do this shit to their kids.
you're making
kind of
me think now we could dig into like a whole Nightmare on the Elm Street TV show now. Now's
Well,
the
you
time
could.
for that to come around.
You could, and that would be a perfect way to get into it, would be that sleep center, to where it's like, all these kids who come in and out of this center, and it's like, how many of them have such a high mortality rate and all that kind of stuff, because like, you got to imagine, like, if this
That could be
place
a great
kept going,
Netflix,
it's like, wow.
Netflix or Amazon series.
Because that's the thing. It's like, yeah, it's like, for how long could Freddy just keep tormenting these kids, and these parents keep doping them up, and it's just these kids are battling it on two fronts, and that's kind of the whole idea of the whole thing. To where the kids are fighting, for their, because they're innocent. They're the innocent ones in the whole thing, but yet they're the ones who are fighting the war, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, although I have to say though, I really like Ronnie Yu's direction in this one, because and if you remember, he also directed Bride of Chucky.
Yes,
From
which
1998.
I like. Some people don't, and I do, but I know some people don't like that one. And yeah, again, he brings the same kind of tongue-in-cheek humor to this that he did Bride of Chucky, and I like that.
Yeah, then you've also got and because I think by that point the Child's Play series had really kind of run its course. But what I really liked was that the guy they had playing Deputy Stubbs in this one, he was actually in the first Scary Movie film. And that's where I got my
Yeah, and his
introduction
name
to him.
escapes me right now too. And yeah, he's been in quite a bit since then, and I can't think of his.
That would be, let's see, Lachlan Monroe.
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah, but yeah, so yeah, they pretty much
Kind of like a poor man's Tim Miller for many years. It seemed like.
pretty much, yeah. I mean, yeah, he didn't really get a whole lot of respect.
Was he as crazy as Tim Miller?
No, but they played very similar roles all the time. It seemed like for many years.
Yeah.
The doofy cop or the, second banana.
Yeah, and although I do have to give Ronnie Yu credit because he's actually went to Ohio University, but he's also a Hong Kong film director, and he had a pretty impressive understanding though of American cinema, which, again, he went to Ohio University, presumably, went through their film program, but I just love how some of these directors that they understand, like people like Ang Lee and others who come from overseas, they seem to understand American psychology and cinema better than a lot of American directors do, which I think is, in this day and age, that's actually almost a shame because they don't make directors here anymore like John Carpenter or Wes Craven or even Sean Cunningham, for example, going back to the Friday the 13th, the original film, because the original one actually was a lot better than really most of the sequels that came after.
The original Friday the 13th, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, story-wise, yes and no. Because if you look at the movie in retrospect, I will be the first to say that the first movie is a very slow burning, to the point where there's a lot of stuff that could have been chopped out. That movie didn't need to be even the hour and a half that it is.
Yeah, it probably
and most of the story doesn't happen
well,
until the last 10 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, but then again...
in an overall...
Yeah, although
for having a
in
story,
my own defense,
that kind of
I
stuff,
tend to like slow burners a little bit more, which is why I liked Hereditary, because it didn't try to rush through anything. It actually kind of took its time and let you digest some of the stuff that was going on. Although
that's fine, but I'm talking about for instance, in the first Friday the 13th, we have an entire 3-minute scene of Alice just making coffee with nothing around it to really make it mean anything. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like there's a lot of filler in that first movie because you really got basically a Twilight Zone episode.
The first Halloween film had a lot of filler in it too. I mean, the action really doesn't pick up until the second half. So, but the whole first half.
But you need the normal. You need the normal to make the weird.
That's a good point there. See, that's the thing that these movies, depending on the movie, it's like if Carpenter and Wes Craven handle their characters very, very well, in a sense that they know you have to get invested in them to give a shit. Because if you don't give a shit, then you're not going to care. You're going to be rooting for Jason to just hack their head off.
Right, which is what it kind of evolved into. Because and especially for the Nightmare on Elm Street series, I think by the time Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare came out, it had pretty much run its course. And plus also you had like Freddy's Nightmares, which was on TV. I mean, that's another thing from the 80s and 90s that I think a lot of people forget now, is that they actually had that show for a few seasons.
New Line wants you to forget about it.
Yeah, I remember though.
They refused to release it. Oh, I know. You can see it. I guess there was a television channel called Chiller that had it for a while in the U.S. And there's like 1 or 2 episodes, I think, on the Blu-ray box set. But yeah, that whole series was like, we've got a bunch of money, we're gonna do whatever the hell we want, and they did. I mean, there was episodes that were edited because they couldn't air them and stuff, and we've never seen them in their complete forms. They did do a video set back in the day, but it was only a select of I think 8 episodes of I think there was 24 altogether. There was a full season, I think, of the first season. I think there was.
Yeah,
22 or 24 episodes. I think. Yeah,
I think it ran like 2 or 3 seasons because the.
Maybe that's the case. It was like 12, 13
after he killed off some of the
yeah.
teenagers, then they started getting to older, like college age or.
Well, the show was a little different in the sense that Freddy was involved, but he was more like the crypt keeper.
Yeah, kind of.
He wasn't.
Yeah,
there was only like
really,
2 or 3 episodes
where
he crossed over.
Yeah,
because.
Yeah,
otherwise,
only
outside
a few
of the first
episodes where
episode,
he was the direct threat. It usually involved the victims more, and then Freddy would kind of like step in and deliver the final
it was more
blow.
like a Tales from the Crypt in a sense that outside of the very first episode, which was his backstory of when he was first arrested, After that, Freddy kind of plays like a crypt keeper outside of, I think, maybe 2 or 3 episodes that I can think of where, like you said, he's actually involved in the actual episode. And one of those episodes, I think, is on that box set. That would be the one with the kid who's got to work the graveyard shift. I think that's the name of the episode. So I think Freddy's tormenting him throughout that entire episode. Otherwise, there's only 1 or 2 other episodes where Freddy's actually part of the carnage. But otherwise, like you're right, the stories have nothing to do with Elm Street usually. They're generally straight out of Tales from the Crypt or Twilight Zone, what have you, to where like they're always about, like one that sticks out of my head was like there was one about this woman and guy who were plotting to kill her husband type thing. You know what I mean? They're nothing to do with Freddy.
Yeah, and then there was another. Yeah, and then well, though one of the episodes that featured him more, there was a young woman who was like part of.
Right,
she was
there's
like
a couple
college
where he is involved.
science student who was like trying to. She was like very sexually repressed, and then the
safe sex episode or whatever it is. Yes,
Yeah.
that one he's directly involved with, and the one with Cameron Michael Mitchell or whatever his name is. That I was talking about, where he's the kid who's stuck in the graveyard shift at a fast food restaurant. Outside of those 2 or so episodes, those are the only ones that I can think of offhand that he's actually involved in. The rest are like Tales from the Crypt type stories.
Yeah,
that's what I was getting at. Yeah,
but Freddy's Nightmares was actually one of my favorite shows during the late '80s because they also had that was one of the big 3 along with War of the Worlds and Monsters. I mean, who remembers Monsters? Because
I do.
Yeah, there was an episode of there that had a very early scene with David Boreanaz in it. He was playing an extra in there.
Yeah, I do remember that.
Well, there was a huge revival in the 80s because of Tales from the Dark Side. So you had all these shows kind of come out of that. And the Freddy's Nightmares just kind of fits in that category, to where the Friday the 13th series, on the other hand, was like X-Files before X-Files.
Yeah, and you know that's another thing, because the Friday the 13th television series had nothing to do with the actual Friday the 13th films. Even though it was billed as taking place in the same universe, I think. But yeah, that was actually more like you said, it was more X-Files.
And that was, from my understanding, because Paramount would not allow them to use Jason in the television series. So they had to come up with... They had the name.
But could they really keep them from using the name? I mean, Friday the 13th.
Well, that was the thing is, it was produced by Cunningham's company and all that kind of stuff. And Frank Mancuso Jr., who was the son of the Paramount's head at that time, senior, he was involved with it and all that kind of stuff. It was just both of those shows were like, I can't believe these syndicated companies are so stupid to give us all this money. We're going to just do what the hell we want. And that's kind of what they did. And they got away with so much more.
And these shows were actually good, though. I mean, I was kind of surprised because I mean, you look back at them now.
That's because they didn't have somebody looking over their shoulder. That's why.
Yeah.
They didn't have a bunch of. It wasn't until, and this is what happened, was the shows got popular, and then in the later part, that when they moved them into prime time, because they were in syndication, they weren't like on Fox or anything like that. They were, wherever they were. So you had certain markets that started showing these shows at 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday.
Yeah, I always got them in the evening
to freak out.
Yeah.
When they first started, they did, and that was the whole thing. Was it wasn't? They just kind of went under the radar. Nobody noticed. But when they started actually getting viewers, they moved them up in the schedules. And then parents started freaking the fuck out, and rightfully so on some of these, because the Freddy's Nightmares got away with a lot for that time period.
Yeah, I actually got in trouble for racking up my parents' phone bill with the calls to the Freddy 900 number. Cause,
Freddy.
Yeah, because I was like, oh man, this is cool. And then, oh wait, I ran up my parents' bill. I'm going to be grounded for I think I wasn't allowed to use a phone for like at least a year. But so the
do you remember them at all, Larry? Or?
I do. There was Monsters, there was that Nightmare show, there was the Friday the 13th, the series had its own little compelling plot going on.
I was going to say, that one's not related. Yeah.
I know.
Freddy's Nightmares, you could put in the Tales from the Crypt, Tales from the Dark Side type show. Friday the 13th, though, like you're right. It was, like I said, X-Files before X-Files. It was a completely different idea and concept. And for those who don't know about the show, it was set in this
antique shop. Yeah, it's like,
antique shop. Thank you.
Yeah, it's like
and
the owner was selling
each of the.
Yeah, he was selling these cursed objects, and then he goes to hell, and his nephew and niece have to recover all the objects and put them in this vault that's supposed to be able to contain their power.
But it's actually part of his plotting to gain more infernal power and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, the series kind of went off the rails in the third season. That one did get, I think, 3 seasons. See, I think Freddy's Nightmares only got 1 or 2 seasons. Because I think there's only like 20-some episodes of Freddy's Nightmares. But
yeah, I think it ran for like
Friday the 13th, which is actually Friday the 13th is available. You can get that. You can't get Freddy's Nightmares, though.
Yeah, Friday the 13th, I think, ran 3 or 4 seasons. So that ran quite a bit longer, but just because the writing was so good for the time.
Well, it did have a Friday connection because John D. LeMay was in the series for the first 2 seasons, who actually went on to play what the hell was his name in Jason Goes to Hell? It just escapes me now.
Was that the older guy who used to be the business partner?
No, that was Chris Wiggins. He played the mentor figure.
John D. LeMay was the younger guy.
Oh, yeah.
And he was in Jason Goes to Hell as Steven. So he played Steven in Jason Goes to Hell. He was actually supposed to be Tommy.
Yeah, and then he left the show for some reason after like the 2nd or 3rd season, and then he
didn't want to be in it anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he kind of dropped off the radar as far as acting.
Well, that's when he went and did Jason Goes to Hell after that, and then that was like
Roby,
one of the last.
Who played the niece, kind of continued on, but I think her acting career kind of fizzled out after that show too. Which is kind of sad because they were both incredible actors, and like I said, I mean the writing on Friday the 13th, this series was, like I said, you can look back at it and realize it was kind of hokey for the time, because this was 30 years ago, but at the time, it was good, and I think if you were to resurrect it today, it would probably still work. You wouldn't need all that much tweaking, but
it didn't. Friday the 13th, the series, it was called something else completely different in most places.
Oh, was it? That I didn't know.
Yeah.
I know it was called that.
In Canada, I think it was called, because it was actually a Canadian production, I believe, too. It was called, I can't remember the damn name. Something like Needful Things, but not Needful Things. Something like that, though. Just a very generic kind of, like Curious Objects or something like that it was called. I can't remember what, but
Curious Goods was the name of the antique store.
Yeah, that was, I think, the name of the store, the show then, too, because the U.S. was one of the few places that was actually called Friday the 13th. So maybe England and a couple other, but I think Canada, it was called Curious Goods and a few other places as well. I'd have to look that up for sure, but I do know it carried a different name in a couple other countries. Yeah,
and interesting thing about Freddy vs. Jason, getting back to that one, because Mark Swift and Damian Shannon, I'm looking up some of their other work, and Larry and Tom, you guys probably know more about them because I only know them through Freddy vs. Jason.
Well, they went on to write the remake of Friday the 13th, didn't they?
I think so.
Yeah,
which probably is why that movie did better than it otherwise would have.
As well.
But
but I don't. Yeah, they were actually. They're not. They seem like they're pretty big fans from what I've seen in interviews and stuff. I liked Freddy vs. Jason. Wasn't a huge fan of the remake of Friday the 13th. It was okay. The first hour is okay. It just goes to shit when they get to Jason's underground lair. Because I'm sorry, Jason doesn't take prisoners.
No, he does not.
He is not Leatherface, and they tried making him into Leatherface.
Right,
so I was
then,
like, no.
So how come it is they were able to do a remake of Texas Chainsaw Massacre that worked?
Because they didn't change much. They stuck to the normal. They redid. To me, it was like what they did there was kind of similar to what Hammer did to the classic monsters back in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, kind of revamped them. Yeah.
Kind of revamped them,
well,
but at least kept them
in the
still
50s,
in the same
horror, the horror of Dracula was like 58, I think. But yeah, so
yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So we're talking like 60 years worth of history here. Oh my god. But yeah, it's like I was looking up some of their other work, but I don't think they It's kind of like because looking at Freddy versus Jason, like I said, these guys were not prepared to settle for anything less than something that 100% respected the original
Right.
material from both franchises, and in a lot of ways, because I had also seen the Thing prequel, that was to John Carpenter's original film
I've
version.
seen about 5 minutes of it.
Yeah,
That's all I can watch.
Right, and to me that actually, like I said, I mean, it respected the original material because these guys actually were very methodical in recreating the look and feel of the film, although it was kind of a rehash of the John Carpenter version. But they're trying to tell the story of what happened at the Norwegian outpost, which to me, wasn't all that necessary. But if you're going to tell that story, the guys who wrote and directed actually, I think, did a good job. But it's like, why can Hollywood?
Well, didn't the
not-
studio kind of take that away from them at the end and
a
change
little
some
bit,
things?
Yeah, some things were changed,
Yeah.
but for the most part, I think it was still pretty decent. But one thing that really bothers me though is like, movies like this tend to be the exception rather than the rule, because it seems every time they do a reboot or a remake or even a revival to some extent, it's like they don't seem to respect the original material that they're working with. There's often a sneering contempt for both the original and the audience who liked it. I mean, we see examples of this in STD, in the Disney Star Wars. We see it in the reboots, even of like Rob Zombie's reimagining of Halloween, where he was kind of like dissing Michael Myers' costume from the John Carpenter version. Well, it's like, who wears clean overalls? Well, it's like, first of all, he murdered the driver to get it, and probably before he actually went to work and did anything to get dirty. So, I mean, there's any reason why the overalls would be clean. But it still seemed to me like, and Rob Zombie's Halloween, actually, I think the first half was okay, but it stumbled when it went into the remake half, because then it became like this
Yeah.
cheap, shallow knockoff of the original.
Because what I will say about Zombies Halloween is it feels like the 78 movie is like the movie version of what really happened, and what really happened is what's in the Rob Zombie version, like you said, up until a point.
Yeah,
Because like...
because that's one of those things where I have a love-hate relationship with it, because I love the first half. I love that they had Danielle Harris in it, bringing her back from because she was in Halloween 4 and 5, and kind of fell low-key in love with her at the time. But it's like, I can see where he tried to go with it, but then he stumbled so badly in the second half when they get to the remake portion of the first film, because he spent so much time telling the backstory that he just kind of stumbled for the second half. And then I think, like we were discussing previously, when he gets to the second one, by that time he was done, but he didn't want to do any more sequels, so he just,
Yeah, I hate that fucking movie.
yeah. But so I think though, and that kind of led to that the current sequel that John Carpenter is producing, where he wants to end it definitively, but also he kind of wants to like give it a proper send off, really, because
Well, they've insinuated that it may not end here.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, so we'll see. Damn well if it makes anything more than 70, 80 million dollars, they're going to do a remake. They're going to do another one. If it does more than 80 million, they're going to do another one.
If you make it cheap enough and it makes enough money.
Yeah, because I think I don't know the offhand, but I think the budget's only like 10 or 15 million. I
Yeah.
don't think it's very much.
And I think if you make it that cheap, it's going to be hard to not make money.
Yeah, because right now I don't think.
Right.
Yeah, because if as far as sequels go, because I always kind of wanted to see a sequel to Freddy versus Jason, because especially since the ending that they used in theaters, kind of left the door open for one. Now there was another ending that they shot, and I saw this on the deleted bits on the DVD. Was the alternate ending kind of like had Laurie with her boyfriend, and she's finally giving it up to him, and then he turns into Freddy and starts killing her. But
It's lame, but yeah.
Well, so I can understand why they cut it, because it also makes a sequel rather prohibitive.
I'm sure it tested horribly.
Right,
Yeah.
but I think they
Well,
actually bring her Laurie and her boyfriend back for Freddy versus Jason versus Evil Dead, because
Yeah, and that's Yeah, that's supposed to be an adaptation of the straight script that never happened. Yeah, which I know you wanted to get on that, so we can get to that point.
Because that would have been really interesting to see, actually. On like I said, copyrights and actor availability, it just never happened, and it's kind of sad because I think Robert Englund is kind of
well,
like
I think the Evil
Freddy
Dead
Krueger.
remake had a lot to do with that as well.
Yeah, yeah.
See, because there was that at the same time too, and you also had the rights were bouncing around again. And I think that's when also Platinum Dunes stepped in and they got involved. And once they stepped in they were going to do Friday the 13th, that was it. Freddy versus Jason Part 2 was dead no matter what. And unfortunately, it was one of those things because you like we were bringing up, it didn't cost that much to make Freddy versus Jason. Yeah, it was, I think, the most expensive for both series at that time. But it brought in, what, 180 million worldwide, or was it more than that? I'd have to look.
I think it was about 180 million. Yeah. Yeah, but there's a blog actually.
It's the highest grossing of both at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a blog actually, and I think they moved to a WordPress version, which I think I've linked to on my blog.
Well, I want to say it opened at 47 million in 2003, which was just at that time I think was the highest grossing opening for one of these horror movies, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and there's a movie. There's a movie review blog that just does B movies and like horror, science fiction, and genre. It's called "And You Call Yourself a Scientist.com," and like I said, they moved to a WordPress blog version, but they they have a review up there, and I've got a link in the description for anyone who's watching this. But I highly recommend this one because they just go all out. Now, they gave spoilers galore, so if you haven't seen the film, I highly recommend you go see that first before you read this review because...
okay, I was wrong. It only did 114 altogether.
So, 114 altogether. Well, it's still not bad because the
that's
budget
still a
that
lot.
they had,
yeah,
because the budget they have. Because you have to remember, horror films are relatively cheap to produce. John Carpenter did his for,
and it opened at 36, not 46.
Yeah, because John Carpenter did Halloween, I think, for like what was it, like something like 300,000, give or take, and then did a global.
I want to say 250,000 actually.
Yeah, 250,000, but then it did a global take of 70 million, which if you adjust for inflation.
Well, until Ninja Turtles came out, it was the highest grossing independent movie of all time.
Yeah, yeah. So, when we're talking about having a film like Freddy vs. Jason pulling in like over 100 million, considering how the budget was, that and also you have to take
30 million on a budget.
Yeah, and when you consider, that's just a production budget. You have to also factor in the marketing and merchandise, which probably
they did
to
quite a bit of
60
marketing
million.
for that.
So for them to pull in over 100 million on something that cost 60 million total, that's pretty good. I mean, that's the kind of intake that The Last Jedi should have taken in, but didn't because it was horrible.
Not only that, the 8th and 11th in the series of both.
Yeah.
Because I think, it would have been the 8th Nightmare on Elm Street movie and 11th Friday the 13th. So, yeah, Jesus.
Yeah, so, yes, and that's actually why you see so many horror films produced, because it's cheap and the return is almost guaranteed. Not quite, but
especially if you got a Freddy or a Jason, which makes no sense, and the fans are right. Why the hell haven't we had 10 Friday the 13th movies? It makes no sense.
Haven't we had?
Why
13?
haven't we had 13 Friday?
No, I mean
13th?
Since the remake. I mean in the last 20 years or whatever. That's what I'm saying. It's like these franchises have gone stagnant. And,
they do, and
there's no reason that.
Yeah, they do, and I think Freddy vs. Jason actually, if they'd been able to make a sequel, would have revived both franchises, because by that time both had really kind of played out. Because eventually, because with Friday the 13th, there's only so many times you can watch Jason kill a bunch of stupid, shallow teenagers. With Nightmare on Elm Street, there's only so many jokes that Freddy can tell. But
here's the thing: in the last how many years has it been since it was 2009, right, when the remake came out? So here we are going on a decade since the last Friday the 13th movie. Paramount sat on their ass for all this time, and they didn't do shit with the franchise. And their excuse was the Rings, whatever the hell it was, 2 or whatever it was, come out and it didn't do well, or the Rings 3, whatever the hell it was. That is the dumbest excuse I've ever heard in my life. One has nothing to do with the other than they're technically in the horror genre. There's no comparison. You can make a Friday the 13th movie for a pack of gum and all you need is a couple teenagers, a tent, and a guy with a hockey mask. You know what I mean?
Yeah, a guy with a hockey mask who's built like a NFL linebacker.
Yeah, this makes no sense whatsoever why they sat so long on these rights.
And the scripts are Jason decides to murder a bunch of horrible teenagers.
Right. I mean, you can do something unique, don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying the point is they sat on this franchise for so long that they basically lost the rights. And the only excuse we've gotten from anybody was it's either Brian or Brad Fuller, whichever one it is, the Fullers that's involved. Because there's so many of them between Star Trek and whatever. But no, he from Platinum Dunes, his excuse, they didn't do it because they knew they wouldn't have time to make another sequel.
Well, you should make a movie and then,
because just to be clear, this was not one of those deals to where you have to make something to retain the rights. No, they had a 5-year window to do something with it, and they fucked it up.
Well,
because
make a movie, then ask, negotiate for more time.
Right, or something, because now Warner Brothers has got it, and they're ready to go full bore ahead, but they've got this lawsuit going on right now with Sean Cunningham and Victor Miller that's kind of putting in a kibosh on a lot of Friday the 13th. We can get into all kinds of shit right now, what's wrong with the Friday the 13th franchise, but yeah, that'll take a whole nother show. So I'm not gonna
also, they could have a crossover with the Conjuring franchise.
You could, if you wanted to. I don't care, but
I
that's the thing is,
I don't want such a crossover because I hated Insidious. It was horrible. I never got into The Conjuring or anything to do with that either. It just, oh God.
The Rings or whatever the hell it was called, that was more in that genre of The Conjuring to me than it is the Friday the 13th type genre. They're two completely different horror subgenres. And to sit there and use Rings as an excuse not to spend $10 million on a Friday the 13th movie when you're Paramount Pictures and you're in the fucking, red as bad as you are right now, and you could use something like this.
And also, realistically, Friday the 13th has an audience.
Exactly.
Rings
that's my point.
Doesn't have
the
an
remake
audience.
was the largest grossing Friday the 13th movie to date. Even if you take in consideration inflation, it's still way above and beyond the rest of them for the most part, outside of Freddy, if you don't count Freddy versus Jason. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's like there was no excuse.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I like The Ring. I like the sequel wasn't all that bad. And they actually had the benefit of having the original Japanese director direct the American remake, so it didn't really lose all that much in the translation.
My
But
point is
like you
that's
said,
just
it
like
just-
it's
it
like a
didn't have
stupid
a-
excuse that has one
it
has
was a
nothing
niche
to do with the other.
audience,
Yeah.
Whereas with the, Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street, you've got a well-developed and built-in audience, so why can you not play
It's
to
fucking
that?
Americana. It's apple pie. It's something completely different. It's not, it's like comparing baseball to football to me, because you're talking two totally different animals, even though, yeah, they're sports, but they're played two different ways. And that's the thing with Rings and Friday the 13th. They play to two totally different audiences. Oh, yeah, there's crossover. Don't get me wrong. But the type of audience that's going to go on a Friday night to see a Friday the 13th movie is not the same type of audience for the most part that's going to go see a Rings movie, is my point.
Right.
And to use that as an excuse not to continue a franchise that's very lucrative for a company that's in very bad financial state right now.
Yeah, and
It's
especially
just
going
great
on
that-
with those, because it's not just the finances that they're having trouble with. Their leadership, as we've discussed here, is just come under a lot of fire for very good reasons. But yeah, I mean, it's like you were saying, it's like they've got a chance to cash in on something that is pretty much a no-brainer. I mean, all you need is a good writer who understands the original material, but nobody wants to touch this. And a part of it, I think, is because of the lawsuit between Cunningham and Miller. I think they're playing a wait-and-see approach.
Well, that just
personally.
started heating up, though. That's the thing. It's like, that's not like, I could see that as an excuse, but it's like you had years and years where this wasn't going on. You know what I'm saying? Friday the 13th could have done all kinds of stuff. The game got off the ground, no problem. I'm pissed at the makers of the game now, and we're working on another follow-up to our Friday the 13th video on Midnight's Edge about all this stuff is what's going on, is they pissed away the time they had, too. They knew the window of time they had. They're acting like, oh, we didn't know this was going to happen, and now because of the lawsuit, we can't finish the game. Oh, no, they knew exactly how much time they had, but instead of fixing the game and doing the updates they promised, they implemented some entirely new structure of the game, or something or other. They did something to basically
and they also
give
gave
themselves
Jason's
a job.
costume the purple color scheme that he had for the original NES version.
Well, yeah, they didn't even finish. Well, we got a bunch of the skins for Jason or the different types of Jason, but they didn't get to finish them all off. That's the thing. There was a bunch of characters and the first story mode, and the first player story mode, and all that kind of stuff. None of that got finished because they knew this time they had to finish it, and they didn't do that. They did something else instead for the game that would advertise to other game makers that they could do this stuff so they could secure themselves another job, which, okay, fine, whatever. But I would think that the fact that you did this and pulled off the Friday the 13th game would be enough to set you up for life with jobs, because these guys were just, clever in how they pulled this whole thing off. But then in the end, they basically dumped on their fans. All the people that they, rode the shoulders of all this time to get where they were, and then they're just like, no, we're just gonna say fuck this, and we're gonna do this, and then we can't do anything after that date because of the copyrights, so we're done.
Yeah.
And they're not really telling anybody that either. They're still selling the game under the assumption that things are going to still be updated on, when they're not. It's I don't have all the stuff in front of me to get into the details, but it's like this whole Friday the 13th mess is just that. It's a big, huge fucking mess right now. And the sad part is the Victor Miller situation isn't stopping them from making a Jason movie, because Victor Miller's Jason is not the Jason that we know. Victor Miller's basically fighting for the rights to the first story, the original story, because that's all he wrote. So the Jason that he owns is just the child version.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, and he also
the hockey mask version that we know now is completely free to be used in any way, shape, or form by New Line Cinema.
Yeah, and he also owns Pamela Voorhees and all that stuff too. So, but
right, that's the catch. It's like the Superman deal.
Yeah, but one question I have though, guys, and I'm going to ask this of both of you. If you could do a mashup of horror icons today, which ones would they be?
I'd love to just see Robert Englund back as Freddy, at least for one more go. If it's Freddy versus Jason versus Leatherface or whatever, I don't care. But
I mean, really, I think, but
it's
this is more
overdue.
My taste for a movie is you mash up Hellraiser, Freddy, and Jason.
That works too for me. Either way,
Yeah.
because I think the Hellraiser rights are floating out there with whoever ends up with the Miramax, or well, it's not Miramax anymore, Dimension, and the Weinstein Company. That's what I was trying to think of. The Weinstein Company rights, or whatever it is now. But yeah, I have no idea.
Having Michael Myers go up against one of the other horror icons, although I'm not sure if I would want it to be, because he, aside from just being unkillable, I mean, he's not really all that supernatural. I mean, he'll tend to. I mean, they tried to make him that in Halloween 5 and 6. But
I would say that Michael Myers is like the worst one to pit against any of them, because I think your point is they keep trying to, even though he's supposed to be some unstoppable force, he's still supposed to be human in the end, regardless. Unlike Jason and Freddy and Leatherface so Leatherface and Michael might be a good matchup.
Yeah, that would. Yeah, I mean, and we're talking the original Leatherface, not the remake version.
Right.
Because the remake version is just
right.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the original version.
Well, they
of
did bring him
Leatherface
back
would be...
to the original version in that Texas Chainsaw 3D. It's the original version.
Oh, did they?
It's not the remake version. Yeah, Adam Marcus actually wrote the script for that, and we talk a little bit about it in our interview. And I actually like that movie. It's actually pretty good, and he's pissed at what the studio did to it. But everything that I didn't like in the movie is the shit that he's pissed that they did to it. Because it was supposed to be set in the 80s. And what it is one of the kids of the family, after it's set up to where it's like it takes place right after the first movie when it first starts. They even got the guy who played the original Leatherface playing another member of the Sawyer family. And they even brought the Sawyer name back and all that kind of stuff. So it's not the whatever the hell they changed it to in the remake. I can't even remember now. Richardson or whatever stupid name it is. I don't know. But anyway, so they So they like lynch mob the house, the whole town does, burn the house down, and there's one child that this one couple takes, and they raise it as their own. Well, she finds out after her aunt or grandmother dies that she's a Sawyer, and she's inherited this house. Well, and she goes to this house with her friends and all that kind of stuff. Well, of course, she doesn't read the letter that she was given to instructions to read right away. And of course, in the letter is Leatherface is in the basement. Feed him. Don't let him out. So, yeah, of course, they ignore that, and Leatherface gets out. But yeah, it's this cool kind of thing to where he knows she's family, to where she kind of can control him into a point. Not control him, but like she won't hurt her because she's family. You know what I mean? So it's like this whole kind of dynamic. It's supposed to, like I said, take place in the 70s or in the 80s, and they even fudged stuff to where they fucked up in a couple scenes where you can see the right date, where it says, the right date, 74 or whatever year it was that Texas Chainsaw came out, and then they even fudged it in some scenes because it's supposed to take place now is the whole thing, but the studio wanted it to take place now, but the script took place in the 80s. Get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he was kind of pissed that they updated it on him without even, because the chick would be in her 40s.
Yeah. So I don't know. It seems like, oh God, dude, just
the studio fucked it up. But
yeah.
if you kind of put that aside in your head, the movie's actually pretty good. It's like, okay, this is a unique way to reintroduce the character, and it's like Leatherface was the only one who survived. And he went and lived with his aunt or whatever in this house for all these years, or it was his grandmother. I can't remember which. It was whoever the matriarchy of the family ended up being after that clan got killed. And we kind of learned that they're not the only Sawyers in town, is what we kind of learned too, is the whole thing. But yeah.
Oh, all right. So Larry, you've been kind of quiet.
Not a diatribe. Sorry, but yeah.
Yeah, Larry, you've been kind of quiet.
So I'm not as deep into Freddy or Jason lore or all that with the movie, so I've been kind of listening and taking in some of this stuff. Where I kind of hook into this was the idea of Ash from Army of Darkness being incorporated into the lore and the mythology of this and the Deadites. And I kind of wonder now that the TV show has happened, would we have gotten the very excellent Ash in the Armies of Darkness TV show that we've gotten if that road was a road that ended up being followed back then?
Because the seeds were set in Jason Goes to Hell, I think we talked about that before the show, because the Necronomicon shows up in Jason Goes to Hell, and the knife is supposed to be a direct reference to the knife.
Yeah, the Kandarian
those weird,
yeah,
and those weird demon things that look like demon sperm for that one Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, Freddy's dead.
Also very they're also very evocative of the Evil Dead aesthetic.
Yeah, no.
And again, I think it all boiled down to rights again, because I think that at that time was when they were working out the deal for the remake, and the Evil Dead rights I think were still sitting at Universal, if I'm not mistaken. They still are. So it's like that was one of the biggest things that got in the way, but they were able to work out the comic book so they could at least do the comic book.
And with the comic book, it created a very different kind of Ash, and Ash was actually very serious about hunting down demons and monsters, and I think that wouldn't have been better for his character in the long run. I think the guy who accidentally started off the apocalypse because he lit a joint with for a girl rolled out of the Necronomicon, and he opened portals to demons in hell because he just wanted to go live life on a perpetual vacation in Jacksonville, Florida.
Yeah,
I think that's
not
more
caring
the
that they were
character.
going to follow him there. Yeah, that's but
well, in the TV show, I don't know if you saw the TV show. He also got on like two proteges, and he also didn't want to screw up their life like his had been. So he figured if he took the easy way out, he'd also be.
Well, and didn't he find out he had a daughter and stuff? I haven't seen the whole thing of the
daughter
second
is
season.
in the last season.
Yeah, I haven't seen the third season yet. So
yeah, I'm disappointed that they canceled that show. I think they had at least one or two more that they could have gotten out, and I hope they'll
I'm
find
not
a way
sure
to do it
what the
again
deal
soon.
is there, because I know there's a fucking fan base for it.
Yeah.
Other than Stars is just.
Stars.
I can't imagine it's doing well on like streaming services.
No, it's the kind of show you need a TV station for. You need to have that watch it on TV community feeling.
Well, and I can't believe like
back to
Amazon
watercolor.
didn't pick it up or something. But that's the problem is Universal owns it, and Stars and all that is in the Universal family, if I'm not mistaken.
Which
so
is
it's all
owned by
kind of
Comcast now. So yeah, they're not going to want to.
yeah.
Yeah, they're not want to compete on streaming services unless they can. And you know, and one question that I have is, if they were to do either a Freddy's Nightmares or Friday the 13th TV show revival or reboot or something, it would probably be on live streaming now, on streaming services now, which to me would be a disappointment if that were to happen, because these are shows that I think really deserve the kind of audience that, because people will.
Well, that's what's gonna happen.
Because I don't think people would.
The stage is set.
Yeah, I don't think people though are really going to want to like have like 18 different streaming services that they want to pay for. You know, most people I think.
Well, we already have.
We'll have like
a
one
Child's
or two.
Play series coming.
Yeah, but it's like, will anyone watch it? I mean, because no one's really watching All Access for CBS. I mean, CBS can lie all
they
it wants,
actually-
but
They've
really,
actually got a TV series I'm considering getting it for. They've actually got a TV series that's made me consider buying it.
and what would that be?
All Access has.
Strange Angel.
Oh.
It's about a weird little bit of American history about how one of the founders of the American rocketry program was also involved with cults with Aleister Crowley and a bunch of weirdness involving that. And I'm betting they're going to ignore the fact that L. Ron Hubbard was also part of that group of occultists in Southern California. It's going to be very weird how he's not going to be mentioned at all.
His estate probably wouldn't allow it, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, Tom Cruise can probably work something out. He's big and
Because I'm sure they own the life rights to his story, and they can probably put the nix on something like that. But in the horror genre, I do know we were going to get a Critters series, and as far as I know, it's still shooting.
Oh, God, that's going to be awesome.
Yeah, Critters got, what, 4 movies?
The service it was going to... Yeah, but the service it was going to be on was owned by IO9, and they shut it down, I guess, or sold it or something. I don't know what's going on, but I have no idea where that's going to end up.
Yeah, Critters was another franchise that really had potential and then kind of petered out after the second or third one. And I was kind of disappointed because the first one was actually good. And
I think it was one of those things that it found a home on video. Yeah.
Yeah, I always wondered why
and
nobody
so
tried to bring that back.
Straight to video.
Because the idea of carnivorous aliens that'll eat pretty much anything that moves.
They did kind of attempt a couple years back to do, and this is kind of what they're doing now, is like a web series. And I think there's even the first like pilot episode or whatever it is on YouTube. But it was supposed to revolve around the bounty hunters. But of course there was critters in it, but you know, so it didn't have so much Earth character that it latched onto as it was going to probably follow the adventures of the bounty hunters. Now this new series, I have no idea what it's about. All I know is it's called, the hell's it called?
What I liked was the thing they had, I think, was in the third one, where they had one of the bounty hunters accidentally took the form of a Playboy model.
Yeah, that was in the first one.
That was the
second
second
one. In it.
Yeah,
second
first or
one.
second one.
That was
Yeah.
the second one.
Yeah, the second one.
Second
yeah.
one. Pretty
Yeah,
I'm
and then-
positive.
Yeah,
that was a good gimmick. That was a
Ugg
good
and
gimmick.
Lee- or
I
Lee.
liked that.
Ugg and Lee.
There's Ugg
Yeah,
and
it was
Lee.
Lee who took the form of the Playboy model and then
The form
got
of the
killed by
female,
the
yeah.
critters later on in the film.
Because Lee couldn't figure out what Lee wanted to be, and that was the longest Lee had sat in any form was the Playboy model. Yeah, because in the first movie he kept changing into random characters, creating chaos in town. Because one time they said like, you know, like
He said nothing likes me.
the mayor or the priest or whatever. Yeah, the mayor or the priest blew up the Bolorama. The other cop did something else because he was looking like the other cop. Yeah, it was like, yeah. So I was like, that was kind of funny. It's a very clever, and the funny thing is it rode the coattails of Gremlins, but that script had been sitting around since like '82, I guess. So it was not. It only got revived because of Gremlins. It wasn't a result of.
Basically, somebody at the studio said, "Wait, we have a script just like this sitting in a drawer somewhere. Let's get that baby to production."
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. But then it kind of went off the rails and petered out like for 3 and 4. And because I mean, because once they killed off Lee, that was pretty much, a no. I mean, why would you kill off one of the bounty hunters?
Well, 3
It's
and
like,
4 followed Charlie,
yeah,
and then Ugg showed up one more time.
yeah. I think that was for
two
part
more
4.
times.
Yeah, because it's
Yeah.
like,
At the very end of 3 and in part 4, yeah.
yeah, which. And I guess the actor was pretty much done and had to fulfill a legal obligation or something, I guess. But they kind of reduced the role. But
I'm
it's
not
like, why would
100% sure. But yeah.
But if they were to reboot anything, if they reboot Critters, they would really want to get it right and not go off the rails like the original series did. Because after part 2, it was just like, why are we having this third and fourth film?
The third one was okay, but
part 4 was almost
straight to
made for
video.
TV level.
Well, 4 actually they spent a lot more money on, but 4 only had 2 critters.
Yeah.
But they spent all the money on the cast. It has Brad Dourif, what's her face, who played Tina Turner, Angela Bassett, a couple other people that are, and plus Don Keith Opper come back as Charlie again. But yeah, the fourth one is different. It would have been a better movie if it had more critters in it, because it would have been more like an Alien movie, because it's all on one ship. So that, you have that isolation kind of thing. But yeah, other than that, I mean, I give them credit for each one of the Critter movies. They did try to do something a little bit different, because, the first movie's all on a farm and the whole town's in chaos because of these bounty hunters. The second movie's the entire town. And then the third movie's in a little high rise, kind of like Die Hard meets Critters. And then the fourth movie's in space in a spaceship. So, they at least tried to do something a little different with each one, even though they spent, peanuts on them. But, I think the second movie, what happened was, I think they brought it out at a real stupid time. Let me see when it came out. I think it came out in February at that time, if I'm not mistaken. August. So yeah, they buried it in August. So if they would have brought it out, maybe, maybe closer to Halloween, it might have done better, I think. Because, they kind of put it at the very end of the summer, and it would have got buried by all kinds of other bigger movies in that time period in '88. So I don't know. They really just, and I know they marketed it okay, because I remember seeing, trailers for it and stuff. I remember it was coming out. I wanted to go see it, but it never came to our local theater, so I didn't get to see it till it came out on video.
Yeah. Yeah, although, all right, so we're getting kind of late. It's almost 11:30 Eastern time. So just to kind of close out, because
about that.
So just to kind of close us out now, Robert Englund is in his 70s, early, like I think he's like 71.
Yeah.
But he could probably still play Freddy again, because he would be under all that makeup. You wouldn't see him having visibly aged.
Oh yeah.
But
you can use body doubles and stuff for other stuff.
Yeah. Or we could go for a different kind of route. We could have Kevin Spacey play, Freddy Krueger.
No.
That's just creepy and wrong.
Yeah, although it would reinforce just what kind of monster Freddy Krueger is supposed to be, though. Which is another thing that Freddy vs. Jason, I think, actually did, was kind of reminded us, that yes, Freddy was not only a child killer, but he also probably raped a lot of the kids who he killed too. So
well, I think that's why they gave him that demonic makeup near the end, to kind of like, because you almost have to at this point, because Freddy's because Freddy's almost become like this.
Yeah, because the opening montage for Freddy vs. Jason, they actually show him with this little girl who's his victim, and he's like licking the back of the photo as a keepsake when the parents show up to torch him, and he's like burning her doll and whatever. But so I really like how that film kind of reinforced that back to the original film, where this is not a character you want to sympathize with, because the thing I didn't like about the Nightmare on Elm Street series by the time it ended was that it kind of turned him into this like kind of wisecracking anti-hero, and it's like you kind of forget that he's not supposed to be someone you're rooting for.
Right. Well, and I have to
No,
correct something that I don't know if you took it out of the article or if you said it yourself, where I think you said that either Jason won or no one won. Freddy kind of won because if he's telling the story.
Yeah, well, he opens telling the story. Yeah, because I guess it's
exactly. People don't ever catch that.
Right,
and I think that's the whole point of having the demon makeup is that Freddy is still, and plus the little wink at the end too is, and the whole thing. I think the whole point with the ending that didn't get it is Freddy is eternal. There's nothing you're going to ever be able to do to Freddy to stop him.
Right,
that's the whole point.
And it's the same thing for Jason too, because
to a point, yeah.
But the ending I think was kind of ambiguous because no one really wins at the end of Freddy versus Jason, because technically Jason won the fight barely and he needed help, but he's still carrying Freddy's severed head to his lair at the end.
Could you do what they did back in the old days with Godzilla versus King Kong? Show half of the movie theaters one ending and half another? Could we
see that's really myth.
Well, for Clue they did like 3 or 4 different endings before they finally...
Clue they did, yes. Yeah. But the Godzilla one, that's just a myth that came out of some magazine. That's not true.
Yeah, it both
depends on are exactly the same.
Yeah, and how you interpret the ending really kind of depends on where you saw it. If you saw it in Japan, then Godzilla won, and if you saw
and that's kind of how they did it with Freddy versus Jason. But at the same time, as I was pointing out, is a lot of people don't stop to think that Freddy's telling the story in the beginning. So he's kind of, it's a never-ending thing. It's like, Jason's still alive, Freddy's still alive. Neither one of them won, or neither one of them lost, really, because that's, I think, the whole point of having that demon makeup in the beginning is that's the way he was at the end. It's like he's eternal. That's going to keep going, and there was a plan to keep going because, as we've talked, the original ending had Pinhead in it, and it was supposed to continue from there. And the next movie, they actually had other scripts for it that weren't related to Ash. But what it was supposed to do then was set up this whole thing to where they were going to set up and I think this was part of Adam Marcus's script, if I'm not mistaken, was going to set it up to where it was going to be a contest. It's like, okay, you guys can't work this out, man to man. We'll give you X amount of hours, and whoever has the biggest body count wins. So it was like this whole thing on Earth, and then, or is that where Ash comes in? I think
that's where Ash comes in.
Yes. Okay. So that was the Ash script. So that was the original sequel then. So you had this whole idea that they were setting up to a point where it was like it was going to happen, and I think they had a version without Ash. Is why I say that, because I think I read that version, and I can't remember who they had as the hero. I can't remember. They might have brought Tommy back in that one.
What's funny is that they brought Johnny Depp back to be the hero.
Well, he's dead.
Yeah, they killed off his character in the first film, so how can they do that?
Yeah, but nobody will remember that.
He's very, very dead.
Well, I remember it.
I was going to say, he's all over the ceiling, man.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, oh my God.
I love that. That is one of my favorite lines in Nightmare on Elm Street. What's the coroner think about it? I don't know. He's still in the John puking since he saw it.
Oh my God.
It's fucking bad when the coroner's puking.
Oh, yeah. All right. So
that's a good place to think.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's a perfect ending for 15 years of Freddy versus Jason.
Pretty much. Well, I don't know. I'm still puking over the fact that STD got a second season. So.
Yeah, I was say we should come back to it because we did kind of go off the rails on it. But it's such an interesting topic, and there's so much to it, and these characters are like our Dracula and our Frankensteins, and that's why our generation feels the way we do about them. And that's the important part about it is, these studios got to understand how important and iconic these characters really are. And I mean, even in some ways, they're probably even more iconic than some of the Draculas and Frankensteins. Because I bet you if you ask any average 10, 11, 12-year-old right now who, Frankenstein is, and they'll, some green monster or something like that. But you ask them who Freddy is, and they could probably tell you his whole life story.
Yeah, and one of my complaints about this whole issue of intellectual property rights and DMCA and everything, it's like, okay, yeah, you might have the legal rights to it, but spiritually, intellectually, the fans have at least as much ownership as the copyright holders, because once something becomes that popular and that much of an icon in society, it enters into an unspoken contract where the fans take partial ownership of it, and if you don't respect them, they will take it out on you at the box office. That's what happened with Star Wars. It's what's happening with STD, which, you know, it probably won't get a third season, because if season 2 bombs as bad as I think it's going to.
That's even if the second season gets finished.
Yeah, and because right now I'm thinking it's up in the air as to whether the Picard show will even get made, because, you know, between...
Well, that I think they're fast-tracking. This is all rumor territory from what I'm hearing, and I'll say this real quick. They're fast-tracking the Picard series. They have not secured funding for the second half of STD. I can't confirm that, but that's just the rumors I'm hearing, because that's why we're already starting to get leaks of, I guess there was a storyboards or some kind of design that got out from the Picard series, and somebody got pissed about it. But yeah, I can't get into all that, but that's just it's
and if we really want to talk to horror show, it's like, hey, those bald Klingons work, give them hair and beards now. What was the point of making them bald?
Because they fucked up.
Yeah,
because they realized
too literally.
Like
I mean, the mirror universe
two-dick,
actually
ugly purple people eaters.
Yeah, and if you think about it, you know, Kurtzman and company take things way too literally. It's like, oh, Kallus cut off a lock of hair to make the first bat'leth, so all the Klingons are bald now. No. That he cut off a lock of hair, not all of his hair. And then, of course, they take the whole redundant organ, so they've got 2 dicks now. Right. So, I mean, guys, you know.
Also, more importantly, how does that even work biologically? Two penises. How does that work?
Klingon women have 2 vaginas. That's.
I mean, how does the geography of that work? I don't understand.
I guess one's a backup or something. I don't know. Or they have 2 wombs so they can have 2 kids or 2 litters. I don't know. But it's one of those things where they did it because it sounded cool at the time when they were doing the pitches in the writer's room. And,
there's no logic behind this shit. Spock would look at this STD crap and he would like lose his Falcon mind. I mean,
I know the next idea. Bring Freddy and Jason out to STD and have them clean up.
Well, Jason's in space somewhere.
Yeah, and that's it for the Wilk Report live stream. So this is Michael Wilk, Tom Connors, and
live
Larry
on
Bernard.
tape.
Yes, live on tape. Saying take care, good night. We're out. And that's it for the stream. Now it showed me recording.
I checked back a couple times. It was not live. Times I checked. Yeah,
it showed I was live for hour 45 minutes. It's still stopping, and we're still recording actually. So because I figure I'll put the extended edition up on Patreon somehow, but it's still not quite going yet. All right, so we're no longer live streaming, but we're still recording. So what do you think so far of what's going on with the horror genre right now? Because, like I said, I saw Hereditary, and that actually turned out to be surprisingly good. I've not seen any of the other horror films that are scheduled to come out.
Would you put Hereditary in kind of like that Conjuring kind of horror genres,
I would
or something
put it
like
more in Wicker Man / Ghost Story, more like Wicker Man, Woman in Black territory.
Okay, and now because we have like Quiet Place was a big one again this year. Because I had this argument the other day with somebody in the comments because they said something about horror was dead. I'm like, are you kidding?
Yeah,
I'm like 2 of the biggest movies this year, the surprise hits, were Quiet Place and Heredity and that other one. And it's like, what are you talking about? Last year was Get Out, and and the Conjuring series is going strong. And it's like, what do you mean horror's dead? I don't like the kind of horror that's out there, but horror is far from dead. And then if I'm looking forward to Halloween in a sense that I hope it's good. I hope it does well. I hope it's clever. I hope it's intense. I hope it's what we've been waiting for. I don't care if it's H2O 2.0, whatever, because we're redoing this again. As long as it gives me a good reason.
It's H40.
Yeah, because I mean, from what I've been hearing, what I've been seeing, I'm a little leery. But if anything comes out of it that's good, even if the movie isn't that great, is if it's a hit then we might get Robert Englund back as Freddy. We might get more of these series back in their original continuities again. And that's the best part, is you can James Bond 90% of these guys. It doesn't have to be Kane Hodder playing Jason, because he doesn't talk. It doesn't matter who's in Leatherface, as long as it looks like same with Michael Myers. The only ones that matter are Freddy and Chucky, when you boil it down to it, because to me, you can't really do Chucky without Brad Dourif, and to me, as good as, somebody else could do with Freddy, to me, Robert Englund, as long as he's alive, is Freddy. It's like, until he's dead, then I don't see another alternative at this point.
Yeah, because Jackie Haley, like I said, he did as well as he could with the material he was given, but he wasn't given all that much material to work with.
Nothing at all. And then the look was stupid.
Yeah,
because
they should have kept the original melted look, but they wanted to go with something a little bit more realistic. And
which, if you go and watch the making of the original Nightmare on Elm Street, they specifically say, we could have went with something that was more realistic, but when we did those makeup tests, it looked dumb.
Yeah, so I mean, they should have. Yeah,
there's a reason why they didn't.
Like I said, there's this pattern of not respecting the original material, where you can't even be bothered to go back and look at any of the extras, like behind the scenes, and say, "Oh wait, they tested this before and it didn't work back then, so why would it work now?" Yeah, let's just go with a more classic look and see what happens.
Well, and if you stop and think about it, Freddy's burnt, but he can take any form he wants. So if you stop and think about it, he's taking the form he's taking because that's what he wants to take.
So he likes looking like a pizza?
Because it's the most grotesque and it's going to scare the fuck out of you. He's not doing it to look medically correct, because otherwise he'd look like a salamander like Jackie Earle Haley's version does, which is stupid because they keep every other aspect of the character the same. You know what I mean? But it's like, because we got computers now and we can actually make it look like his nose is gone and his ears are gone and his cheeks have been melted away like they would medically. It's like, you could do that. But that's, like I said, taking it back, is they flat out said, we tried a lot of that kind of shit. They tried to take away an ear. They had dangly melted skin. Because, that's what the makeup guy said. He goes, at first, when a burn victim, at first, they're like, have skin and stuff just hanging, and melted skin just like dangling. And they tried a lot of that shit. But they said it looked stupid. So they went to this more kind of, and one day he's sitting there with pizza and playing with it. And he's like, oh, wait, that kind of looks like that one kind of burn. What if we did that all over his whole body? And that's really what it was. Yeah. It was like, okay, it's a symbol of him being burnt, but he's not completely burnt away. And whatever choice Freddy chooses to be in that form, because even Wes Craven wanted Freddy to be more of like Plastic Man. That's where the whole striped sweater comes in.
Yeah, he was going on a theory at the time that people can't process the colors red and green together. And
there's that, so you would be memorable, but then not only that, Plastic Man also, whenever he would transform into whatever it was he transformed in, he would still keep that striped pattern. So he's like, as long as Freddy has a pattern, you'll know it's the audience will know it's Freddy. Because in the original script, he could do anything. They had to scale it all back because it's like, we can't do all this shit. Look, they tried to do the arms extending out, and that looked like crap. So it's like, we can't do all this kind of stuff, so we have to scale it back a little bit. But that was kind of the whole concept, was that Freddy could transform into any shape, form he wanted, and the audience would know it's Freddy because it has that red-green striped pattern somewhere within.
Which is why we get Stoner Caterpillar Freddy in Freddy vs.
Exactly.
Jason.
And they actually utilize that a little bit more, yes. And that's where I think the remake really lacked. Because it was like the remake kept trying to get them to do scenes like the first movie. But it's like, just do something original, do something neat. You can open this up completely now. Freddy is able to do whatever he wants now. You can actually do it now. Do it. But keep to the original idea. Or if you're going to go that other route and make Freddy innocent, fine. Go with it then. Have the balls to go that far. Because you said you hadn't seen it. Neither one of you have, right? He's not a child killer in the new version. He's just a child molester. So at that point, it makes you go, okay, so what the fuck does he have the claws for other than to leave evidence? And he's not even investigated. The parents just lynch his ass because some of the kids say something. And they find those claw marks.
Oh, wow.
And they go through this whole thing with the two main kids, who are Nancy and some other kid. And not Nancy Thompson either, just some other different name. Because the parents have very little to do with the movie. The parents, they kind of made them background characters. And then you get to this point where they spend the whole time thinking that Freddy might be innocent, and the kids set him up all this time and all this shit to find out that no, he's not innocent. He did it, but it doesn't matter, because then the last third of the movie is almost a complete ripoff of the end of the original. So it's like you go through all this stuff that it's like you had an idea that you could have gone to different places with it, and you didn't do that, and then you went and just shit all over the original kind of concept. So either way you had it, you fucked it up.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm getting to. So you could have, but you didn't go to that next step because you were afraid people were either going to not like it or what have you. I don't know what the reason was, but if I'd have had control of that, I'd have been like...
So what would have been your course of action, Larry, if you'd been in charge of a Nightmare remake or even a Friday the 13th remake?
Did we lose Larry?
I hope not. I think it's just the two of us now. Okay, yeah, because Larry, I think, because it is almost, it's like 20
That's all right.
minutes
Yeah,
out
I got to
here.
get going here soon too. But
All right, so yeah, we've got a little bit of extra footage. So this extended version is going to go up on
Yeah.
Patreon. So if you want to help us actually on Patreon, please go ahead and click the link that you see in the chat window and become a subscriber and help us pay the bills and also improve the quality of the show. So yeah, this is Michael Wilk and Tom Connors saying adios, muchachos. Come and get us. Good night. Take care.